This is Gary Sastow. I'm a lawyer at the law firm and a partner of the law firm Danziger Markhoff in White Plains, New York, a firm dedicated to, among other things, representing dentists and dental practices. And you're going to hear today a discussion about important legal issues and business issues and liability protection issues that are, really applicable to you as a dentist, to you as the owner or practitioner of dentistry at a dental practice. And we're hoping you'll enjoy it and find it very useful.
Orthomarketing.com, 360-degree digital marketing solutions for your practice.
Well, hello, everybody in podcast land. This is Dean Steinman from Ortho Marketing. And guess what? We are back with another super fantabulous podcast for you. So thanks so much, everybody, for being here and listening. I really appreciate all the support. And it's now summertime almost upon us, 2025. And hopefully everybody's happy. You got the spring, summer around you. But now we have to talk about some serious stuff. So today I have with me a very special guest. I have Gary Sastow, who is a partner in the law firm Danziger Markhoff, who specializes and works with dental practices. And we're going to talk a little bit about issues going on in the industry, what you need to be prepared for, and how to cover yourself. There's a lot to talk about here. So this is a very in-depth, interesting topic here, and very excited to dive into it. So Gary, thanks so much for joining. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Dean. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to adding to the party.
No worries. It's a party, man. So let's kind of jump in. So before we do that, just why don't you make an introduction? Tell us a little bit about who Gary is and what you do and why you do what you do.
Sure. So, as you said, my name is Gary Sastow. I'm a partner at the law firm of Danziger and Markhoff. We're located in White Plains, New York, and the firm has a almost 65-year history of operating in the area of representing healthcare providers, dentists in particular. I've not been doing this for 65 years. I've been doing this for going on 35 years. And I come from a family of doctors, and the healthcare world was very comfortable for me. I understood it. I understood the way healthcare providers see things in a way that's different from people in other lines of work or areas of business. And when I became a lawyer, I gravitated to representing healthcare providers. And it was somewhat of a natural progression. I didn't start out that way, but again, because of my understanding and comfort level, it's I've been very fortunate that I've really enjoyed a fun and an exciting career. Part of the fun and excitement comes from the changes that have occurred in healthcare over the 3 decades that I've been in practice. Dentistry is subject to a lot of these changes and innovations as well. Some are good, some are not so good. Some are a headache, some are making life easier. Happy to be here to talk about this.
All right. So when it comes to a dentist protecting their practice, there's so many different variables and aspects when it comes to coverage for legal, and it's in any business, obviously. So if you can, why don't you give us like maybe the most 3 or 4 most common legal mistakes that you see dentists have when running a practice?
So, the world has become really complicated, and it's complicated from a professional perspective, from a legal perspective, from an IT perspective. And dentists were during their training, trained to provide clinical dentistry,
Right.
not to provide practice management, not to provide excuse me, IT support, not trained to do back office administrative work. So it really is important to have a good team to support the practice.
Right.
Um, Certainly an accountant, and an accountant hopefully that would be involved periodically over the course of a year, not just the accountant who takes numbers at the end of the year and prepares a tax return. Yes, that's an important and necessary function, but someone who can also act as somewhat of an advisor and a counselor, having legal support for not only making sure that your practice is structured properly, but over the course of time, issues come up, whether it's with a patient, whether it's with a vendor, an insurance company, or your staff. That's often something that we find ourselves dealing with our clients.
Right.
And IT, are you HIPAA compliant? Are you ADA compliant? Is everything working? So again, there's only so much that the dentist can do as far as all of this is concerned. And I often hear clients sort of bemoaning, well, yeah, you know, the IT person costs money, the lawyer costs money, the accountant costs money. And that is true. These are all expenses, but they're also insurance policies to hopefully prevent things from going wrong, but also really hopefully allowing the practice to run smoothly and effectively so you can focus on your patient care, focus on your productivity, and focus on doing what you as the clinician does.
Right. Is there like a one size fits all when it comes to a general practice as far as legal coverage, or do you have to come up with a unique strategy and program for each individual office?
So, we're not reinventing the wheel every time, but every practice is to some extent unique.
Right.
It's certainly going to be unique in the personalities involved. Um, there are certainly differences in, general practice versus, a specialty practice, difference in patient demographics. Are you an insurance practice? Are you a fee-for-service practice? Are you a
Right.
blend? Um, where are you located? Is this a one-person practice, a solo practice, or are there partners where decision making and sharing of revenue and all those other items need to be addressed? So, I would say that. Um, Probably 75% is to some extent one size fits all,
Right.
but then the unique part has to be addressed, and obviously that's what makes everyone unique and special.
Right. So, if you were to basically put into a little package the core coverage that a dental practice needs, what things do they check off to make sure that they can at least sleep at night for the basics? And then as we could talk about specifics moving forward, is like we mentioned HIPAA and ADA and partnerships and this and that. But what would you say are the three main pillars that a practice needs for coverage? So from workers' comp to to liability to this or that. Is there any three things that a dental practice needs without question?
So certainly you need to have professional liability insurance. That's sort of number one, and everyone for the most part recognizes that. Workers' comp insurance, absolutely. If you have employees, that's depending on your state, but most states that's a requirement. Um, and general liability insurance, I've run across over the years um, dentists who are very focused, obviously, on the concern of a professional malpractice claim, so they have that insurance, and sometimes mistakenly think that, well, that's all I need. But the patient who trips on the carpet and falls down and gets injured,
Right.
um, that's not your malpractice carrier. That's your general liability carrier. And I actually had a client a few years ago who had a very, very um, dentist phobic patient who came in with a friend of hers and asked if the friend could come into the operatory to provide some moral support. And the dentist, being very accommodating, said, sure. And the patient is in the chair, holding hands with her friend who's standing next to the chair. The dentist takes out the big, long Novocaine needle. The friend sees it in the face. And on the way down, bangs her head on a counter.
Oh boy.
Um, Spoke to my client who was calling to confirm that he should be putting his malpractice carrier on notice.
Mhm.
And I had to point out to him that there was no problem with his patient. This is not a malpractice issue. This is your general liability issue. Fortunately, she was not hurt badly. She never made a claim. It all went away. Um, I'm not sure if he's so accommodating anymore, allowing other people into the operatory, but uh, that's what your general liability insurance covers.
So, and there's so many different variables on that, and what they're protected and that. And obviously, you don't have crystal ball. They don't have a crystal ball, but you don't know what's coming down the pike. So do most you know um, practices that you work with, that you consult with, or the clients of yours, do you kind of look at, here's what you have to have? Do you have like a checklist that you send to them and say, let's make sure we have this or this, or do you customize it for each person? And then who knows what's going to happen down the road, but it's just so you can sleep at night. How do you do it? How do you actually just look at them and say, this, you need this, this, and this, or cover this? Walk me through a little bit of that from when you first work with the practice.
Sure. So when we're working with a dentist who is um, setting up a new practice or even purchasing an existing practice and becoming the owner, um, yes, we do have sort of a checklist of the basics that need to be covered. And then obviously we talk about the unique aspects of the practice and what
Right.
that dentist wants to do with their practice. And to the extent we need to, add a few additional bells and whistles, we do that. One of the fundamental things that we almost always will recommend is that the dentist practice through a legal entity. Depending upon the state you're in, it could be called a professional corporation, a professional association, a professional limited liability company. But what that does is it will protect the dentist from personal liability for any issues that come up other than malpractice. The professional liability, the malpractice, is always personal to the dentist, and there's no entity that's going to provide a shield.
Okay.
But for the person who trips and falls and injures themselves in the waiting room, they're not going to be suing the dentist. They're going to be suing the dentist's legal entity.
Hmm.
So that provides a good shield of the dentist's personal assets. So we always do recommend that we start out um, with a legal entity in place to provide that layer of liability protection.
Hmm. When we talked about before about employees, I've got employees, and I have to have a employee handbook that has to be continually updated. Walk us through the nuances of that, and how important is it that to have that, and be very transparent with your employees as far as what all the bells and whistles and the legality and time off and this and that. So, how important is it to have, or is it necessary, or just a value add for a handbook?
Yeah, it really is necessary. Depending upon your jurisdiction where you are, it may in fact be a requirement.
Hmm.
But even if it's not a legal requirement, it really is very important. For professional staff, if you're hiring associate dentists, um, those people should have employment contracts, formal contracts that spells out the terms of their employment, what they're going to be paid, how they're going to be paid, when they're going to be paid, who's paying for their malpractice insurance, are there any benefits like health insurance or a 401k or profit sharing retirement plan. And very importantly, a non-compete or a restrictive covenant that protects the practice from that employee saying, well, thanks for introducing me to this community, to the patients, to your referral sources. I'm quitting today, and I'll be opening up
Next
across
door.
the street, Monday morning.
Right.
That's not a good result.
Right.
So that's important for your professional staff. For your non-professional staff, it's probably not necessary to have a formal contract with them. They would be employees at will, which means that you can terminate them at any time. They can quit at any time. The grounds for termination can be anything so long as it's not discriminatory. It could even be as arbitrary as I was in a bad mood that day. But you can't say it's because the person was a particular race, a particular ethnicity, a particular sexual orientation. That would become discriminatory and improper. But those employees at will, because you then don't have a formal written contract with them, that's when the employee manual or the employee handbook becomes very important. It's important so that when the person says, I want to take next week off, and you say, well, you've already used up all your vacation days, and they say, oh, I thought I had 3 weeks. Isn't that what you told me when you hired me? No, you have 2 weeks. Look, it's in the handbook that I gave you and you signed for when you started working.
Right.
So it helps in that respect. It also avoids, frankly, errors being made. You have one new employee come on board and you say, we give 2 weeks vacation. You have another one come on board and you inadvertently tell that person 3 weeks of vacation.
Right.
I've seen that happen. And then you've got all sorts of problems because now you either have to, give more vacation to the person who only had 2 weeks or try and claw back vacation. Good luck with that. That's just one example of where the employee handbook becomes important. It's also important in terms of dress code. Really pretty much everything about how the office is going to function, and you'd be surprised what comes up when you tell an employee, oh, you're working late Thursday night. Well, I don't work past 5 o'clock. Well, the handbook says you do on Thursdays. That becomes, really, really very important. And on the dress code issue, that becomes important as well. Whether it's someone who's maybe dressing with a little too much showing, or lately in the last few number of years, I've had issues with piercings and tattoos and things which societally may or may not be
Acceptable.
viewed as acceptable or appropriate in all circumstances.
Right.
So the handbook becomes very important.
This podcast is sponsored by OrthoMarketing.com. Hey, you an orthodontist or dentist looking to give your practice the competitive edge it deserves? Well, look no further than Ortho Marketing. Ortho Marketing is the dentist and orthodontist choice for digital marketing. At Ortho Marketing, we specialize in helping orthodontists and dentists just like you attract more new patients. Our team of experts knows the ins and outs of the dental and orthodontic industry, and we're here to help your practice shine. We're going to supercharge your online presence. We're going to optimize your website. We're going to harness the power of social media to connect you with the patients that you want. Say goodbye to empty chairs and say hello to a thriving practice. Choose Ortho Marketing today and watch your patient list grow. Visit orthomarketing.com and learn more and take the first steps towards your practice success. Ortho Marketing. It's not just our name, it's what we do. often is it a one and done, or is it updated every year, every 2 years? What is a typical SOP for a handbook?
So typically speaking, it's not something that requires that much updating.
Okay.
Certainly, if there are changes in the law, that would have to be updated, or if there are changes in the way you're conducting your practice. Um, Actually, I do have a client a few years ago, on the topic of dress code, who this is the kind of change that you would incorporate. There were a lot of clothing issues in the office.
Okay.
The solution to that was everyone needs to wear scrubs.
Okay.
Um, that was a small change in the office policy and the office culture, but obviously that then needed to be reflected in the handbook. So every few years it's something you should look at, and then more frequently to the extent that there are factual changes in the practice or legal changes. And hopefully you've got a relationship, again, going back to what I had said earlier about having the team, that you would have a relationship with a lawyer who practices in this area, and they would send you the notification. A new law is effective January 1 of next year. You need to know it, you need to understand it, you need to implement it, and it needs to be reflected in your manual.
Okay. So if you were to put like a big pie together of all of the lawsuits in the dental industry, would you categorize most of them as being malpractice and patient focused that of suing a doctor, or is it more another lawyer suing them because they're not compliant with ADA or HIPAA or this or that? Because you got obviously it's almost B2C and B2B there. So where,
Yep.
where would you say the majority? Because they have to be covered both sides. But what's the trend?
So, with respect to malpractice, um, there's not that much malpractice litigation for dentists.
Okay.
Maybe some specialty dentists, oral surgeons, there may be greater exposure, but certainly for the general dentist, um, there's not that much activity. And the reason for that is, let's say you've got a patient who is having an issue with the way a crown is fitting or not fitting. And rightly or wrongly, there have been adjustments made and so forth, and the patient's just not happy and believes it wasn't done properly.
Mhm.
They'll go to the malpractice attorney who works on a contingency, and the attorney will evaluate that case and say, well, you know, the recovery here is $3,000 to go to a new dentist and have a new crown put in, and I'm making up numbers.
Right.
Um, and I take a third of that, $1,000. Well, there are not that many lawyers willing to invest their time and effort into a case where the legal fee is going to be $1,000.
Right.
So the patient is still disgruntled, and what do? Well, they start putting bad reviews on social media,
Right.
and sometimes they go as far as filing complaints with the Department of Health.
Hmm.
The Department of Health is mandated in most states to investigate every single complaint, even if on its face it looks like it's not really particularly substantive. They still have to review it. And that's another area that dentists should be aware of, that if you are contacted by a health department representative in connection with a patient complaint or any other matter, um, you need to be represented by a lawyer, even if it's simple and it's clear cut, because um, the stakes can be high. The Department of Health has the ability in worst case scenario to limit or even completely invalidate your license to
Hmm.
practice. Um, they almost expect you to have a lawyer because they expect you to take the investigation or the inquiry very, very seriously. And sometimes not having a lawyer, I've had clients say, well, if I get a lawyer, they'll think, oh, I'm lawyering up. I've got something to hide. It's actually, in my experience, the reverse. They want to see you be professional and take professional complaints seriously. So they want to see you have a lawyer. And I've had situations over the years where, they've come into an office and said, can I review a patient's record? Yeah, sure, no problem. Come on in. Patient's record turns out to be fine, but while they were in the office, they noticed something wasn't completely the way it should be, whether it was a hygiene issue or a HIPAA issue. You really don't want people like that coming into your office. As a lawyer, I would intervene and say, no need to come to the office. We'll send you a copy of whatever record you're interested in. And to the extent there's any follow-up, we'll be happy to come and meet with you in your office, to keep them out of the office. So that's sort of one area of concern. Obviously, there are ordinary everyday business disputes. You get into a dispute with a landlord, and if the landlord makes a claim for, rent that wasn't paid or rent that was in dispute, that's just sort of an ordinary business issue. But then there are those problems that are, and I hate to say it, there are lawyers who have created sort of cottage industries, whether it's, they hire someone confined to a wheelchair and they say, okay, start going door to door and make sure your wheelchair has access to that office. Or they'll go onto the websites. That's not an ADA compliant website. And there are lawyers who we've seen, somewhat anecdotally, but pretty clearly, they'll sort of target certain professionals. I know in our practice, we saw a lot of plastic surgeons getting demand letters from lawyers saying your website is not in compliance. Then we saw a lot of dentists getting those letters. And we've seen it, as I said, with the ADA compliant access to the office, with the ADA compliant website, and then certainly someone who's been into your office and sees that there are, as traditionally there were, shelves on the walls of the hallways, with little side tabs of all the patients' charts. Here's the A's and the B's and the C's, or some other kind of HIPAA violation, and that can come up and bite you as well.
Two more questions for you, Gary. So a big trend, obviously, in the industry is DSOs and practices being purchased. So and looked at. So almost all of my clients are getting solicited almost daily from a potential buyout or somebody interested in taking over. So what are some red flags that a dentist should look out for when potentially buying, selling, merging? What are like 2 or 3 major flags? Don't stop. Blah 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 blah.
Right. So the DSO world is a little bit of sort of the wild, wild west. There are some very straightforward, honest, reputable players, and then there are some that are not quite as honest and straightforward. And the sales pitch is often very attractive. We'll give you a chunk of money today, and then for the next, at least 3 years or so forth, you'll work for us, and all you have to worry about is your dentistry because we worry about everything else and take care of everything else. That is always going to look the same. So you have to sort of scratch below the surface, and invariably, certain issues come up. We're going to pay you $1 million for your practice, $250,000 at closing, and $750,000 of roll-up stock. Well, I was kind of hoping for the $1 million in cash. No, 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 no. That roll up stock has the potential to be even more valuable because we're one day going to sell and you'll get much more than $750,000 from that sale. I'm conservative by nature and I'm conservative by profession.
Right.
Get the money up front. You want to take a small risk with some portion of the purchase price as sort of equity in the purchaser. We can talk about that, and then, as the expression goes, the devil's in the details. We've seen some of these DSOs offer equity, but not in the big valuable company. They create what they call sub DSOs,
Okay.
where they've created a sub DSO entity that has no function in the world other than to manage your practice.
It's not going to be worth anything.
When the big sale comes, they're not selling your little sub DSO that you've got equity in. They're selling the big parent company on top, and you're not part of that.
Wow.
So, we've seen permutations where, once you scratch below the surface, things are not what they appear.
In that regards.
So, you have to obviously be careful. And again, it goes back to that team.
Right.
Have your accountant look at the finances of this company. Have your lawyer look at what the deal really is, not what it appears to be. And then, frankly, I had a client not too long ago who did a lot of implant dentistry and did a lot. Well, there was a lot of back and forth discussions with a DSO who was looking to purchase, and they had a real problem with the supplies he was using.
Yep.
And the problem was he was using expensive supplies. And they told him essentially that, well, once we do the deal, you'll start using these supplies. And he said, yeah, but those are really inferior. He was unwilling to go into a transaction where there was that kind of pressure that he would have to use what he viewed to be inferior supplies,
Right.
cheaper, less expensive supplies,
Mm-hmm.
more profit, but professionally that was not something he was comfortable with.
High standards. Yeah.
So there are a lot of pieces to these deals, and
Right.
and they really have to be examined very carefully, and to some extent resist, the sales pitch of, we're going to give you a big payday today, and down the road you'll have even a bigger payday.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Right.
you've really got to be careful.
All right. Two final questions, Gary. One is if you could give one bit of legal advice to every dentist listening today, what would it be?
Um, don't cut corners. As I said, there's a tendency, and especially when you're starting out and you've got a lot of expenses and maybe not that much revenue yet, put that team in place. Have a good accountant. Have a good IT company, making sure you're up and running first of all, and that you're HIPAA and high tech compliant. Have a lawyer somewhere in the background who can be there to backstop issues that come up, and really focus then on running a good, clean, well protected practice, even if it costs you a little bit of money. It may, to some extent, sound self-serving because I'm that lawyer that would be brought onto the team, but being absolutely honest, I can tell you that I can just go on and on and on with examples of where situations come up, and my thought is, oh, if only you had spoken to me before this happened.
Right. Exactly. Right.
And that's really my advice, and to sort of not necessarily follow the pack. There's a lot of, well, that's what everyone seems to be doing, so I guess I'll do that too.
Okay.
There may be a good reason for doing it, and it may be an appropriate thing, but it may not be. And I've seen dentists follow sort of professional or business trends
Right.
that, may work for their colleagues in the community, but it may not work for them because, again, every practice is a little bit unique and different.
Okay. One final question. So I like to read and, always keep up the stuff. So if you were to, I don't know if you're a reader or not, but if you could recommend one book to anybody out there, it could be fiction, nonfiction, one book that you think has been kind of a game changer or you just thought was incredible, what would you recommend?
So my reading, and I guess I'm going to sound a little maybe nerdy, but my reading is history.
Okay.
I'm a real history buff.
Okay.
So I really can't necessarily tell you of any one particular book that really was like wow.
Okay.
But I really am fascinated by history and by historical personalities.
All right.
So,
Was there a biography that you read that was so interesting that you never knew anything about, or watched a biography on somebody, or?
I've always been very, very impressed when it comes to biographies of Abraham Lincoln
Okay.
and Golda Meir, the former
Okay. Yep.
and one and only female prime minister of the state of Israel early on in its existence. They were both, in obviously very, very different ways, really quite remarkable characters and personalities. So that's really kind of where my my kind of recreational reading.
Oh, good. Awesome. All right. So, Gary, thanks so much for joining. I really appreciate it. Guys, there's so much you need to learn and cover. Don't do this yourself. Don't go to ChatGPT and put it in and make yourself your own contracts. So that's what lawyers are here for. So, Gary, if somebody wants to learn more about you, how to contact you, how you can help them, what's the best way for somebody to reach out?
Sure. So obviously, other than reaching out to you and asking for my contact information, luckily we've got the internet these days.
Correct.
And if you go to www.danzigermarkhoff.com, you'll find me, or my name, Gary Sastow, Sastow. You'll find me through my firm's website. And, to the extent that, I and my colleagues at the firm can be helpful to you, that would be terrific. In addition to what we've been discussing today, my colleagues at the firm do estate planning for dentists and do defined benefit and profit sharing plans that are customized to really work well for dentists and other healthcare providers. So those are the three core areas of our firm, and they're all very, very important elements for dentists and for dental practices.
Great. Well, Gary, thanks so much for joining. I really appreciate it. Everybody out there, I said, please speak to professionals when needed. Do an update, and if you are looking for any help, questions you have, please, Gary's the man. So appreciate everybody in podcast land. Thanks so much for all of the support, questions, comments, listeners. I really appreciate everybody out there. So Gary, thanks so much for joining. Everybody on podcast land, thanks so much for listening. And if we don't speak to you, we'll see you soon. Have a great summer, everybody.
OrthoMarketing.com. 360-degree digital marketing solutions for your practice.